So, why did we start beekeeping? Well, we have a huge urban garden and know the value of pollinators and the role they play in food production. To help our garden, we initially planted flowers and shrubs to attract the native pollinators. Problem was, since we live on a hill in a very windy area, the pollinators would often be found on our plants exhausted from fighting the winds. So, in order to increase the number of pollinators in our yard, Darla decided that we should get a few beehives. It shouldn't be much work than we already have to do in the garden. Buy a few hives, buy some bees. The bees will do their bee things. They'll pollinate our flowers, and we may even get some honey at the end of the year. So I decided we can have one hive. We will get a hive. We researched beehives, and we signed up for the bee club, where we found out about a thing called Heroes to Hives, where I could learn a little bit more about beekeeping. We ordered our bees, and then we waited for our journey to begin. However, the bees started the journey for us. The journey started as coming home from work one day. I go into the house and I was planning to go run an errand, and then I walked outside and there's a bee swarm in front of my house. We found out where the swarm was lighting. I let Darla know. We went out, grabbed our cameras, grabbed bee gear, did not know what we were doing, and threw a swarm into a box. Luckily, we were able to call some mentors from the club. They told us what to do, and after some initial misunderstandings, got it right, and we captured hive number 1. We had a steep learning curve after capturing Blue Swarm. Luckily, the Heroes to Hive program provided plenty of knowledge. We learned about hive inspections and to inspect with a purpose, how to manage hive space, and how to properly feed and treat and manage mites in the hive. The big thing we learned is that bees need to be treated like livestock. You need to manage their space, their pests, and their feedings. Well, we finally received our ordered bees. After having almost a month with Blue Hive and learning on the fly, the bee nucleus that we purchased arrived on a cold, wet coastal day. Memo to self, bees do not like it when it's cold and wet and get moved from a nuke into their permanent home. They were very feisty, and we didn't take much video during this time because the biggest part of the project was getting them into their new hive safely. Now that blue and yellow were established, we started to inspect the hives with a purpose routinely. Specifically, we looked for eggs, larvae, brood, cap brood, and to see how many resources were being stored. What we noticed is yellow was a little slower, and blue were very busy little bees. They had very quickly filled both deep boxes, and we were concerned that they may swarm. So in order to prevent this, we, with our grand total of 2 months of bee knowledge, decided that we were going to split Blue Hive doing a walkaway split. This created a very busy time in our beekeeping summer. The problem was, in weakening Blue Hive, it set them up to be usurped by another hive. We had a swarm, this is the second swarm, come into our yard and try to take over the Blue Hive. Very quickly, we took an empty hive, threw the bees from the usurpation into the new hive, moved that hive to a different area, and waited to see what would happen. Inspecting the hives a few weeks later, we found that the nucleus that we had tried to create using a walkaway split never made any eggs. The usurpation swarm that we put into a different hive, we must not have gotten the queen because obviously we had no eggs in that hive. And sadly, Blue Hive, during its inspection, we realized that their queen must have been lost during that period of time because that hive also had no eggs. So now we had 3 hives with no queen at risk of becoming a laying worker colony. And so this is when beekeeping became crazy for us. Blue, the nucleus, and the green hive all had no queens. So we ordered 3 queens, watched all the videos, looked how to install queens, and tried it. Only one of the queens established. The other 2 hives rejected the queens. So the nucleus had a queen, and that nucleus is now teal hive. The blue and green hives, however, having not taken a queen, we ordered 2 more queens. More money, bees came in the mail, and we tried a different way. We took frames from blue and the green hive, we put them into a purple hive, and split that hive with dividers so that the queens would get established with their own small little brood of bees. Problem was, we were going on vacation, and we still didn't know if the queens were working. Our pet sitter definitely will watch our cats and our dogs. She might feed the bees, but she's not going to requeen our hives. So, in a panic, I drove and picked up 2 nucleus colonies. Nucleus colonies home, set them on the hives that we thought would need the queens, and then we inspected purple hive. Of course, both queens were accepted, laid eggs, and we took purple hive, moved some of the bees into blue, we moved with that queen, we moved the green queen with some of the bees into the green hive, and we still had bees in the purple hive. Of course, we still had these 2 nucleus with their own queens. So the purple queen came from one of the purchased nucleuses, and we created a new hive, pink hive. Pink hive is a nucleus colony that had its own queen that had been purchased with the nuke. Right before we went on vacation, we noticed that yellow hive was starting to make swarm cells and queen cells, supersedure cells. Darla told me that they were going to swarm. Well, we destroyed what we thought was all the queen cells and all the swarm cells, and we went on vacation. When we came back weeks later, we discovered that yellow did swarm, but the queen did her job. She made queen cells, and some of the queens must have hatched. I was worried I was going to have to buy queen for this new hive, or maybe move some resource frames around from another hive. Darla told me to wait, and within a few weeks, we saw egg. We now had 6 hives, and we didn't want to lose them because of all the work that had been placed into these hives. So we set out a swarm box in case the bees got a mind of their own and decided to leave. The problem was, we caught a completely different swarm of bees, taking us to hive number 7. In beekeeping, there is a saying, a swarm in May is worth a wagon of hay. A swarm in June is worth a silver spoon. But a swarm in July isn't worth a fly. And this was late July. So that means we had to catch the swarm, nurture it, feed it, baby it, and do all we could to make it as strong as possible to survive the winter. We finally reached the part of the season that most beekeepers, especially new ones like us, were looking forward to: collecting and harvesting the honey. This is one of the benefits, but it's just as much work as everything else. You have to inspect the hive for resources, take only what you think the bees won't need, convince the bees that you need the honey more than they do. Then you have to extract the frames, extract the honey, filter the honey, jar the honey, clean the frames, and give them back to the bees, and then you have to clean all of the equipment. We only took 14 frames this year because we didn't want to take resources from the bees. And out of 14 frames, we got about 4 gallons of honey. With the last inspections completed and the honey processed, we prepped our hives for winter. We wanted to make sure that they would be warm enough, dry enough, and have enough food to get through the colder months. In order to do this, we made quilts that we placed in top of the hive. They were essentially pillowcases filled with pine, absorbed the moisture. And we found later in the year that actually worked very well. Our hives are insulated, so we didn't have to worry about wrapping our hives. We closed the entrances down to prevent more wind from going into the hive. We added a fondant patty on the top, and then we placed dry granulated sugar in the feeders in case they had eaten all the fondant and they didn't have enough nutrients and they needed more food to make it and not collapse. Before doing our winter prep, we did our last mite treatment of the year. All 7 hives had mite counts at less than half of 1%. So we figured it'd be good. We would winterize the hives, we would take a break, and settle in for the easy part of beekeeping. Well, apparently at the coast, the bees continue to fly, and because of that, they continue to get mites. What we did notice is one day we checked our bottom boards and saw more mites than we could count. So we did a mite count treatment, and we found out that some of our hives were as high as 8% in mites. Untreated, those hives would have probably died off. So we began aggressively treating the hives. By the end of November, we finally had the hives at less than 1% each. And we treated our hives pretty frequently through the winter to make sure that we would not have a colony collapse before the spring. In conclusion, I'd like to leave you some points that Darla and I learned as first-year beekeepers. The first is that you have mites. Varroa mites are endemic. They're in nature. They're on flowers. They're on other bees. Your bees are going to bring them back to your hive. You're going to grow your own mites in your own hives. Those mites are the number one reason that hives collapse. In order to prevent this, you're going to have to learn to identify mites, count mites, treat for mites, do a count after treating for mites. And you're at the coast, you're going to have to treat for mites and count mites and figure out a system that works for you 12 months out of the year. Another point about becoming a beekeeper that we learned this year is that there is a steep learning curve. Initially, I believe that we're going to be like many beekeepers and really just be hands-off. But the studies show that most of the hands-off beekeepers end up leaving beekeeping in 2 to 3 years because their colonies collapse or their hives die out and they don't understand why. So learn all you can. Realize that beekeeping is regional, so learn all the regional knowledge there is to know. Beekeeping at the coast is a lot different than beekeeping in the Willamette Valley, a lot different than beekeeping in Eastern Oregon, and obviously different than beekeeping in the United States. To learn this local knowledge, join a local club, find a local mentor, attend events that are available both locally and in a state, and learn every time you open your hive. Make sure that when you're in your hives, you are learning something every time. Another important point to remember is that bees should be considered as year-round livestock. You need to learn how to manage their pests. I've already talked about varroa. You need to learn how to manage their space. If you don't manage their space, they are going to manage it in a way and may eventually swarm and leave the space that you're providing. You need to learn to manage their food, how to feed them and when to feed them. You also need to manage how they have access to water. Bees use water year-round. So remember, bees are livestock and they need to be evaluated and treated as such year-round. Another thing we learned this year is that beekeeping takes a lot of time to be done right. You're going to spend a lot of time in managing your hives, treating for pests, inspecting your hives. It can also be quite expensive when you figure the cost of hives, the cost of feeding, the cost of treating for pests. We were told by an instructor that every time you open your hive, it's like setting dollar bills on fire. So learn to get good and fast at it. The last point I'd like to make is that you need to find some way to document what is happening in your beekeeping apiary. Whether it's on paper or electronic, these records will help you remember purchases, how you've treated your hives, what happened to your hives, what the inspections showed in your hives. There's just no way to remember it all. In fact, when we made this video, we had to go through our documentation, phone videos, purchase records, just to make sure it was in the correct chronological order. In conclusion, the purpose of showing you our first year of beekeeping was not to discourage you, but rather to help you and encourage you to enjoy the journey as you undertake your new adventure as a beekeeper. You're going to have failures, but keep at it and you'll probably have many more successes. Learn all you can, but listen to the bees. They will tell you what they need and what you should do next. But don't be surprised if they do something off script. Enjoy their company, sit in front of the hives, smell their pheromones, listen to their sounds, and you will realize why beekeeping is such an enjoyable hobby.